Ever noticed how the loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest? Or how those who know the least often speak with the most certainty? Yeah, there's a name for that, and it's not just arrogance. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and once you understand it, you'll see it everywhere. From the coworker who insists they could run the company better, to the uncle who believes he knows more than doctors and scientists, this strange psychological illusion explains why ignorance and confidence often walk hand in hand. But here's the twist. The truly intelligent? They're the ones who constantly question themselves. In this video, we'll explore why the gap between what people think they know and what they actually know can be so dangerously wide. You'll learn how this illusion leads to poor decisions, broken relationships, and even global consequences. But more importantly, you'll discover how to avoid falling into the same trap yourself. Because the moment you realize you're not as smart as you think, is the moment real intelligence begins. So stick with me until the end, and let's flip this illusion on its head. It's a funny thing, isn't it? The less someone knows, the more they seem convinced they've got it all figured out. This isn't just a quirky personality flaw. It's a psychological trap known as the illusion of competence. People stuck in this mindset aren't lying. They genuinely believe they're smart, and that's what makes it so dangerous. They mistake confidence for competence, unable to recognize the gaps in their knowledge. To them, ignorance feels like insight, and questioning themselves never even crosses their mind. Think about a beginner chess player. After winning a few casual games, they might assume they're a tactical genius. They don't realize the depth of strategy, the countless hours of study required to truly master the game. That blind spot, that overconfidence, is classic Dunning-Kruger effect in action. The same happens in everyday life. A first-year med student diagnosing everyone at dinner. A self-taught finance guru shouting advice online. When you lack real understanding, you also lack the ability to judge your own ignorance. It's not stupidity, it's cognitive bias. Now here's where it gets interesting. True intelligence often carries with it a heavy dose of doubt. Those who actually know more tend to hesitate. They weigh variables, consider opposing views, and ask hard questions. It's not that they lack confidence, they've just seen enough to know how much they still don't know. That's the paradox. The more you learn, the more aware you become of what you don't know. But if you've never gone deep, everything looks shallow. So why does this illusion persist? Why do people cling to the belief that they're smarter than they are, even when the evidence says otherwise? That's where the real trap begins, and in the next part, we'll uncover how the Dunning-Kruger effect was discovered, and how it quietly manipulates the decisions of everyday people, possibly even yours. In 1999, two psychologists from Cornell University made a discovery that still echoes today. David Dunning and Justin Kruger ran a simple but brilliant experiment. They tested people's actual skills, in logic, grammar, and humor, then asked them to estimate how well they did. The worst performers didn't just fail. They wildly overestimated themselves. And just like that, the Dunning-Kruger effect was born. But here's the twist. It's not that these people were lying. They weren't pretending to be smarter than they were. They truly believed they had performed better than most. Why? Because the skills they lacked were the exact skills needed to assess their own performance. In other words, they were too incompetent to recognize their own incompetence. That's the cruel joke of metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. And when that's missing, self-awareness goes out the window. What makes this effect so slippery is that it feels normal. If you've never studied science deeply, a pseudoscientific claim might feel correct. If you've never practiced emotional intelligence, toxic behavior might seem justified. The mind fills in the blanks with overconfidence. We assume we understand because the brain hates uncertainty. And confidence, even when unfounded, gives us a sense of control. But it's a control built on illusion. This isn't just about individuals. It scales. From corporate boardrooms to political debates, the Dunning-Kruger effect shapes public opinion, leadership, even policy. But what makes someone most susceptible to this bias? That's the question we'll unpack next, and the answer might shake your assumptions. Confidence is a seductive thing. It draws people in, commands respect, and often passes as competence. But here's the kicker. Those who know the least are often the ones who speak the loudest. And the reason is both simple and disturbing. they don't know enough to realize what they're missing. In their world, everything is black and white, obvious, and easy. That certainty? It comes from a place of ignorance, not wisdom. And that's the sweet spot where the Dunning-Kruger effect thrives. Let's get practical. Think of someone who just watched a few YouTube videos on investing. They suddenly feel like the next Warren Buffett, tossing around buzzwords and bold predictions. Meanwhile, seasoned investors, the ones who've survived crashes, read hundreds of books, studied behavioral economics, they're cautious, nuanced, even hesitant to offer advice. Why? Because they understand risk, complexity, and unpredictability. The overconfidence bias doesn't hit them. They've outgrown it. This pattern shows up in workplaces all the time. An inexperienced employee might challenge a manager's decision without fully understanding the context. Not because they're bold, but because they lack the awareness to see the bigger picture. And when confidence outpaces skill, bad decisions follow. It's the intern who thinks they can fix the whole system, unaware that it's already held together by duct tape and miracles. It's the rookie who criticizes the veteran, blind to what they haven't learned yet. That gap, between real skill and perceived skill, is what we're up against. But the scariest part? This false confidence can be incredibly persuasive. People trust conviction. They follow strong opinions. And that's how misinformation spreads, how weak leaders rise, how fragile ideas become movements. So, how did the ancients deal with this? What did the wisest minds in history say about those who thought they knew everything? There's a story that Socrates, one of the greatest minds in history, was called the wisest man in Athens. But he didn't take it as a compliment. In fact, he disagreed. His wisdom, he said, came from only one thing: knowing how little he actually knew. That's not false humility. It's deep, penetrating self-awareness. And in a world full of loud opinions, that kind of humility is power. The irony? Most people mistake it for weakness. The real thinkers, the real learners, they tend to speak less and ask more. They don't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, they live in the question. They know that knowledge is never a destination. It's a journey with no clear end. Every insight opens a dozen more doors. And every time they master something, they see how much more there is to master. This isn't insecurity. It's intellectual humility. Now think of how rare that is today. Scroll through social media, and everyone's an expert. Everyone's got a hot take, a solution, a shortcut. Very few people say, "I don't know." But Socrates built an entire legacy on that phrase. Because I don't know isn't an admission of defeat, it's a declaration of honesty. And that's the foundation of growth. So, how do we apply this? How do you develop the courage to admit your blind spots in a world that rewards certainty? That's the key to escaping the trap we've been talking about. But not everyone wants out. Because for some people, admitting they're wrong feels more painful than staying ignorant. And that's where arrogance becomes armor. Arrogance doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, just loud enough to stop you from learning. It tells you, you already know that, when you don't. It says, they can't teach you anything, when they probably could. And the worst part? It feels like confidence. But where confidence is grounded in skill, arrogance is rooted in fear. Fear of being exposed, of being wrong, of being less. And that fear, if left unchecked, kills growth. Here's what most people miss. To improve, you have to admit you're not already great. That requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is uncomfortable, especially if your identity is built around always being right. So instead of facing discomfort, people double down on their ignorance. They reject feedback, dismiss criticism, and surround themselves with yes men. In that echo chamber, their overconfidence grows unchecked. But deep down, they're stuck, unable to evolve. It happens in careers, relationships, even spirituality. Someone might spend years repeating the same mistakes, convinced they've got life figured out. They confuse experience with wisdom, as if time alone equals growth. But growth only happens when you confront yourself. And arrogance puts up a wall between you and that confrontation. It whispers, "You're already smart enough. No need to look deeper." And so the years pass, and nothing changes. Now, what if I told you that arrogance doesn't just block personal progress? It infects entire systems. Bad leadership, Poor policy, broken institutions, they're often led by people who refuse to see their own limits. And when ignorance holds the microphone, the consequences ripple out fast. Next, we're going to explore what happens when this arrogance becomes loud and dangerously influential. Ignorance is one thing. Ignorance with a megaphone? That's a whole different beast. When people with limited understanding rise to power or visibility, the damage multiplies. And in today's world, where attention is currency, loudness often trumps wisdom. The louder someone sounds, the more convincing they seem. But volume is not value. And the rise of overconfident, underinformed voices is one of the great modern dangers. You see it in politics, in business, even in online thought leadership. Someone speaks with absolute certainty about topics they barely understand, and people eat it up, not because the ideas are good, but because the delivery is confident. It's the illusion of intelligence, dressed up in charisma. But when decisions that affect real lives are based on surface-level thinking, the cracks begin to show. The economy suffers, trust erodes, culture polarizes, and the worst part? Those in power rarely realize they're the problem. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect becomes more than just a personal bias, it becomes a societal disease. Entire movements can be built on flawed logic. Leaders can rise not because they're insightful, but because they're assertive. And once that happens, anyone who speaks with nuance or humility is seen as weak or uncertain. We stop valuing thoughtfulness. We start rewarding arrogance disguised as strength. So, what do? How do we protect ourselves, and others, from falling into this trap? It starts with a shift in how we define intelligence, not as knowing it all, but as the ability to keep learning. Because once you redefine what it means to be smart, you open the door to something rare, humility without insecurity, and that's what we'll uncover next. Let's get something straight. Being humble doesn't mean being weak, and questioning yourself doesn't mean you lack confidence. In fact, it's the opposite. True confidence is the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. It listens, it learns, it adjusts. And the person who embodies this isn't constantly trying to win, they're trying to grow. That's the core of intellectual humility. Now, here's the mistake most people make. They think humility means shrinking. They assume that if they admit they don't know something, they'll be dismissed or overlooked. But have you ever met someone who said "I don't know," and you instantly trusted them more? That's not weakness. That's authenticity. People can smell fake confidence from a mile away. But humility wrapped in clarity? That's magnetic. It invites collaboration, connection, and deeper thought. So how do you build that kind of mindset? Start with questions, not answers. Ask yourself, what might I be wrong about? What haven't I considered? Surround yourself with people who challenge you, not just the ones who agree. Keep learning, even if you think you already know. And remember, humility doesn't cancel your achievements. It makes you more aware of how much more there is to achieve. That awareness sharpens your mind instead of inflating your ego. It's a practice, not a personality trait. You can train this like a muscle. And the more you do, the less you'll fall for the illusion of being the smartest in the room. Because intelligence isn't about having all the answers, it's about knowing how to ask better questions. And once you start asking those better questions, you begin to see yourself, and others, in a whole new light. There's a moment, and maybe you've felt it, when a light clicks on in your mind. Not because you discovered something new, but because you realized how much you'd been blind to. That's not failure. That's a breakthrough. Going from "I know everything" to "I didn't even know what I didn't know" is one of the most powerful transformations a person can experience. It's not comfortable, but it's honest. And in that honesty, real intelligence begins to grow. Blindness, in this context, isn't just about lacking information. It's about being unaware of our limitations. The Dunning-Kruger effect thrives in that space, in the blind spots we refuse to acknowledge. But when you step into insight, those blind spots become areas of curiosity instead of shame. You stop defending your ego and start expanding your mind. You become less reactive, more observant, more intentional. And from there, life starts to feel different. You'll notice the tone of conversations shift. You'll ask better questions. You'll listen more closely. You'll find yourself less interested in winning arguments and more focused on learning something new. That's not just personal growth, It's a psychological revolution. And it starts with one simple, humbling truth. You don't know as much as you think, and that's the best news you've heard all day. But what do you do with that truth now? How do you apply everything we've uncovered, not just to spot the illusion in others, but to free yourself from it for good? Stick with me, we're almost there. Let's bring it all together. Here's the thing most people never realize. You don't have to be the smartest in the room to change your life. You just have to be aware enough to question yourself, to listen longer, to learn without ego. The Dunning-Kruger Effect isn't a curse, unless you let it be. It's actually a mirror. And once you're brave enough to look into it, really look, something powerful happens. You stop pretending. You start growing. Now let me ask you something. Where might you be overestimating yourself without realizing it? What assumptions are you holding on to just to feel in control? Because the moment you can answer that honestly, you'll unlock something most people never touch, the clarity that comes from not having all the answers. And that's where real wisdom begins. Not in knowing more, but in seeing more. So, if this hit you, even just a little, don't let it stop here. Apply it. Catch yourself when you rush to certainty. Pause when you're tempted to dominate a conversation instead of understanding it. That pause? That's growth in real time. And if you want to keep growing with us, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and leave a comment telling us where you've seen the Dunning-Kruger effect in action, maybe even in yourself. Because the more we talk about this, the more we all rise together. And trust me, the journey from illusion to insight? It's the smartest path you'll ever take.